इंसान परेशान सुनने वाला बेईमान इंसान परेशान फिर भी चालू है ये काम.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Yellow Door Talks. I am Sonam Mahajan, a mindfulness teacher and life coach. And today I'm in conversation with Jayesh Parekh in his beautiful home. Jayesh is the co-founder of Sony Entertainment Television. He is a senior advisor to several organizations, funds, entities, and he spent 12 years with IBM across Houston and in Singapore. Jayesh is also the published author of the book What Shall We Do With All This Money? Jayesh is also the co-producer of the film Jhalki, which is inspired by the Nobel Peace Prize winner Kailash Satyarthi. Join me in conversation with him. Hi Jayesh, welcome to Yellow Door Talks. It's fantastic to be in conversation with you after all these years of having known you, of having been a mentee and learning so much from you. So thank you for being here.
And thank you so much, Sonam, for inviting me to this talk and this chat, and hopefully it will be useful.
Absolutely. Look forward to everyone enjoying it. Jayesh, I've known you for a long time, and I would like to take this conversation today, take the opportunity for us to get to know you as a human being, what your perspective on the whole of your life is as we sit here today, right now. And of course, there's a lot I want to learn from you and talk to you about, and I think we'll do that in part series. But let's start with this today, if that sounds good.
Yeah. I think it's a very simple life overarching that I had. I'm incredibly lucky. I had some terrific breaks in my life. So when I look back at my life, majority of it, I'd say that 80-90% of it, I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah.
Right? I'm just so blessed. A few things here and there which can be constituted as a mishap. Maybe that was sort of my learning. You know, you learn from a lot of these mishaps and all of that. But yes, I mean, very lucky that I grew up in a very ordinary, middle class, mediocre, humble beginnings. And, you know, if somebody would have said that, you know, would you pick Jayesh Parekh as sort of where he is today?
Yeah.
And chances are that very, very few people would have said that I'd be sitting here where I'm sitting today.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, I think I'm super fortunate and lucky to have gone through the progression of life and the various places where I ended up and who I ended up with and what I did with my career and entrepreneurial journey, and landed up here in Singapore.
Absolutely. So I introduced you, of course, and I think a number of us watching would know your journey and what you've achieved. How do you view success, if I can ask you?
Sure. I think success to me is where I am at now. I'm content. I think part of it is if you can avoid being discontent, that's a huge piece also. So part of it is being content. I'm just happy. I'm peaceful, calm. I'm high on life. I enjoy doing whatever it is that I end up doing. And I think the biggest asset that I have is my network of friends. So for me, success is my network of friends, each one of whom feels that I'm one of their close friends and whom I feel is one of my close friends all over the world. I think that combination really is what success is all about for me.
Yeah. So the relationships matter to you.
Absolutely incredible.
Awesome. And is there any part of, you know, the journey that you described in terms of the success that you feel most proud of?
I think my middle class values, right? I grew up as a middle class person, and then as time goes by, you check and balance your life and say, hey, who am I now? Each passing day, each passing year, each passing episode in your life. Yeah. And I would say that my middle class values have stayed with me, which I'm extremely proud of. Various people would react differently with different things that you end up doing. So in terms of the journey, for example, Sony Entertainment Television, that whole journey of the Sony Entertainment Television was incredibly exciting and incredibly successful from an economic point of view, and and even the bragging rights that you get along with it. So that's obviously one of the big journeys. Second one is, of course, the IBM journey was fantastic because that's an executive position and professional position. So going through that and bringing IBM to India, right? So that was an epiphany in that piece of the journey of a professional life. Switching to entrepreneurial life, and then succeeding in doing the entrepreneurial journey, and then fast forward and also having a thesis to give back. I think that's a huge pride for me as well. So I really thrive on it.
Right, and we'll get to all of this. Give me a sense, Jayesh. We know that there's a lot of abundance that you feel you experience now in every aspect of life. Is there anything you feel you still want to do? Any desires from life right now?
Yeah. So I think I've tried to retire twice. So I continue to want to have that aspiration, but it's a future aspiration. Every time I get a break and I think that I've got nothing else going on, and something happens in my life and I get a break. And so I'm in that part of my life now where I'm going to switch gears and go after an impact thesis, an impact thesis of investing in an impact thesis for alternative protein startups, for example. So this is a new journey that is starting just now. So I think from that point of view, I think giving back is a very sort of common term, but I think giving back in a sense of taking all the experiences and all the learnings in my life and bringing it together, whether it's economics or impact, or supporting entrepreneurs, for example. All of that comes together in this chapter, and every time I do this start, I think this is the last chapter after which I will retire. But so that's where we're at.
Okay, so that's an ongoing journey for you, and I guess there's no end to kind of exploring how one can give back, and it goes on.
Absolutely. I think also it's to do with your personal thesis and philosophy, experiences that you gather. And there are some people who want to build their own empire, some people who want to help other people's empire. So for example, Bill Gates has his own foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Warren Buffett says, no, I'm not going to do my own, I'm going to give it to you because you know better, you're younger than me, so you can do a better job of that giving back. That's from the non-profit world. And also for the for-profit world, there are many models of giving back, some of which could be you set up your own family office and then you invest in impact, whether it's impact startup or invest. So that's social enterprise investing. And then of course the third is also you could have some lending model so that you actually have a low risk, low return model where you lend for people who are doing good, entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, for example. And then that's also, again, it's your personal philosophy, but my sense is that everyone wants to contribute in their own different way, and it's also the risk-taking ability of the person that decides at the end, especially from the economics point of view, right? Because you've got X amount of funds and money that you want to use for the rest of your life. Well, you don't know how long you're going to live, so how are you going to determine that?
So I see that, the life that you've lived and kind of the mindset you had, the traits, disposition, so to speak, kind of is still showing up for you, and it's guiding even how you give back in a sense. And you spoke about being happy, having that sense of peace. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? Are you happy with life the way it is now? I know a lot of people aspire to be where you're at, to have the life that you do. How do you look at it?
Yeah, I think it's really the intersection of being content. If you continue to be ambitious, right, that sometimes creates unhappiness, right? So I think contentment is really a big deal. And contentment is not just economic contentment, it's about also what you made out of yourself and how much you care about what people think of you, right? That creates a lot of discontent. And therefore in there builds in a bragging rights issue, right? Saying that, I want to do things going forward in the future which is going to give me a bigger kudos, pride. So I think from that point of view, my personal sense is that if you're content at where you arrived, so I've arrived there where when you look at different aspects of people's wealth, right, that's one thing, and then people talk about time, right, so I have secured my time in such a way that I call it time affluence,
Yeah.
right? So I'm so happy to be practicing time affluence that I can do what I want, when I want, with whom I want,
Yeah.
and that luxury that I have.
Yeah.
And I think the last part is the mind affluence, right? So the wealth affluence, the time affluence, and the mind affluence.
Yeah.
And I think therein lies the real key, right, to success for me in life, which is to say that you arrive at a point, doesn't matter what your age is, doesn't matter what your economic wealth is,
Yeah.
but actually at some point you arrive where you feel content, you feel happy with what you're doing, you feel happy with the path that you've chosen, and you personally feel comfortable that you have done what you want to do, and you feel good about what you've done,
Yeah.
as against what other people think of what you've become.
Correct. Yeah.
I think that's where the dissonance is.
Yeah. And this is such an individual journey. I think, like you said, there isn't a certain amount of, wealth that one reaches and then you kind of decide. And this proportion that you're talking about, it comes from a sense of being aware of who you are as a person. How did you know that you've arrived, like you said, and that it's enough now and time to perhaps to take life in a different direction? Yeah.
So I think two parts to it, right? So one is that I'm still doing a fund, a venture capital fund. So there's economics involved with it.
Right.
But that's not the only reason why I'm doing it. So I've not abandoned it, because I will be an investor, my friends will be investors, there'll be other people, and so I'll be managing a pool of money
Yeah.
where I'm responsible for their well-being as well, people
Correct.
who are investing in me.
Yes.
So that's one part of it.
Yeah.
But realize and recognize where I came from, right? Where I came from was a middle class family in Calcutta. Growing up, probably end up doing a job and live in Calcutta happily thereafter,
Yeah.
right? From there, when you start arriving, if the contentment is there, right, at every point in life, it doesn't matter when the life economic well-being cuts off,
Correct.
you're happy.
Yeah.
Now, the only other piece would be that if there is a calamity, a disaster, whether in the economy or in my own personal portfolio or what's happening in the world,
Yeah.
of course, that's the only thing that people fear, is saying, so security is a big
Right.
deal, right, for people. Whereas for me, the contentment overcomes my insecurity.
Okay. And you felt you had that sense of contentment pretty early, and it's been with you while you build what you built?
I think I come from a place of insecurity.
Okay.
I come from a place of inferiority complex, right? Because I was growing up,
Yeah.
I had nothing,
Yeah.
and I always craved, because I saw friends all around me having a good life,
Yeah.
and I didn't have that. And so I started from there,
Yeah.
but I think the turnaround happened probably when I joined IBM,
Okay.
and I started feeling a sense of comfort that, actually even before that, so I got a job with the University of Texas at Austin as a
Yeah.
research engineer,
Right.
and I could see the cusp that, okay, I think we're almost getting to the point where for the rest of their life we'd be okay,
Yeah.
kind of a situation. But real inflection point came at IBM, right? Once I went into IBM, and those old days of IBM when people retired from IBM.
Right.
So if I hadn't flipped out of IBM after
Yeah.
12 and a half years, I think we would have still been working for IBM, and we would have been in some place in US, in Texas or wherever, because I came from Houston to Singapore. And I would have been happy, because it's a phenomenal company, fantastic people, they look after their people.
Right.
Probably not like how today's youngsters go into Googles and Facebooks and Amazon and make this
Yeah.
huge amounts of equity option and stuff like that.
Right.
We didn't have that windfall during our time, but they used to take care of people, and so
Yeah.
I think that was the inflection point.
Yeah. And I like that you use the term we, and I'll come to that. It just talking about this inflection point, and it's interesting because this is again something that you can only know for yourself when you reach that point. So you felt that empowered you to then take decisions in your life which were perhaps more aligned towards your disposition, towards taking risks, doing what you wanted to do, because you felt that sense of contentment.
I think that's also happened as a two-edged sword, because when we were here in Singapore
Yeah.
with IBM, this opportunity of India moved physically to Bangalore, to
Okay.
India, and so they said, hey, can you guys move to Bangalore?
Right.
And I've never worked in India, and we went through a long, arduous journey to arrive to where we are here in Singapore. At best, we could have gone back to US, but to go into India at that point in time, and this is a long time ago.
Yes.
we didn't see ourselves right living there.
Yeah.
So that was one sort of issue. But I think the other part of it is there that all my family members, my parents, my grandfather, my great grandfather,
Yeah.
we come from a business family, and so nobody's ever worked for someone for a living. So my brother and I, we are the first generation of people in my father's lineage where we went to work for someone. And so when that point came where they said, okay, now go to Bangalore or go back to Houston,
Right.
we just enjoyed Singapore. We thought this is a good life. It's close to India.
Yeah.
We like the lifestyle here. Our kids were growing up, and so we said, hey, maybe this is a good place to. And so when I said no to IBM, that I don't want to go back to Houston, they said, we don't have a expat job for you here in Singapore.
Yeah.
And at that point, I became a forced entrepreneur. So it was a mutual separation because IBM didn't have a place for me here in Singapore,
Yeah.
and I didn't want to go back to US.
Right.
And so it was a mutual separation, which ended up me being a forced entrepreneur,
Yeah.
which was a huge epiphany in my life as against insecurity. Well, there was an economic insecurity saying, oh, wow, what's going to happen because it's a very expensive place.
Right.
But on the other flip side of it is that it was a huge high that finally I'm arriving, because I always craved that I wanted to do some business, or
Right.
I wanted to be a businessman. And
Yeah.
of course, I started as an entrepreneur. And then, of course, that journey ended up doing 9 startups.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like how you describe it as perhaps having to become a forced entrepreneur. But like you said, I think there were a couple of options, but perhaps that didn't work out for you. You didn't want to choose those. And in that sense, it became forced, but not really forced. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, forced in a way that I was here,
Yeah.
and we had a chat about it to say
Yeah.
that, hey, what do you want to do? Shall we go back to US, or shall we
Yeah.
live here? Shall we go to Bangalore? All of that conversation happens. But at the end of the day, that decision-making criteria comes from a zone of a comfort zone.
Yes. Yeah.
So while there is a comfort zone of the place being Singapore,
Yeah.
and the kids being here, and the lifestyle being here, the friend circle being here,
Correct,
that's the good news.
Yeah.
And then included in there, throw in the insecurity of economics. So otherwise, I go into a security of economics, I go back to US,
Why?
but then I miss out on the comfort zone that I'm in currently right now.
Yeah.
And so that trade-off was really the decision making, where I say that I'm a forced entrepreneur. Of course, I wanted to be one,
Yeah.
but I got, in a way, had the expat assignment continued, then I wouldn't have had that opportunity.
Correct. How do you look at spirituality? Have you had any personal experiences with it, through this journey that you've had? You've been through a lot, you've thought through a lot, felt a lot, likely taken a lot of action, decision making. Did spirituality ever come into play? How do you think about synchronicities, or perhaps experiences that can't be explained with the sensory or science? Yeah.
So growing up, I don't come from a very religious family. So my father was a Jain, and my mother was a Vaishnava, Swaminarayan. Mother was quite religious.
Yeah.
Father was religious to the point that he'd go to the temple, but was not religious, deep-seated.
Yeah.
Therefore, neither of them tried to influence me towards their religion particularly.
Yeah.
I personally feel that I'm very blessed, and so therefore I give that choice to my kids also.
Yeah.
We don't push or force kids. I mean, if we're going on to a place and
Yeah.
we're going to go to a temple, they'll come along and we'll say, would you like to go with us? And they'll go with us.
Yeah.
But it's not like we'll go on a pilgrimage and you're forced to go on a pilgrimage with us, or
Yeah.
we're going to have some ritualistic things. I mean, we still have, during Diwali, we'll have some puja and stuff like that, which they will participate with us.
Yeah.
But so the freedom that I got, I give that same freedom to my kids. I think spirituality for me early on started with a free experiment where one of my hostel mates in Baroda said that there is something called transcendental meditation.
Yeah.
Would you like to do that? And I said, how much does it cost? And he said, it's free. So I rounded up my roommate and my neighboring roommates, and 4 of us went to learn transcendental meditation. And we stayed with it. So the last couple of years of the last 2 years of my undergraduate life, we all used to meditate.
Right.
And you'd meditate. So again, transcendental meditation, you meditate 20 minutes in the morning, 20 in the evening. They give you a mantra. So each one of us had our different experiences. We talk about it.
Yeah.
But I think the metabolic rate changes, and so there's a lot of personal experience that you go through, physical experience that you go through. that made a lot of difference to me. Turns out that at the end of it, my roommate, who's super smart guy, decided to take off and become a saint, a sadhu, right? So he took off. He went into this meditation journey. He went from different parts of India, discovering different parts of spirituality. He came back to Calcutta, and we had a long drawn out chat of the experiences that he had. That influenced me as well.
Okay.
Till today, again, he's still my friend. He's in Calcutta, and he's a huge meditator.
Yeah.
So that meditation continued with him.
Okay.
It broke for me. But then after my exit with Sony Entertainment Television, I said I wanted to retire. So I retired, and what do people do when they retire? Well, they go to do some seva. So I went to Manav Sadhana and Gandhi Ashram and did some seva, traveled the world a lot. But also one of the things I did is I went to do Vipassana meditation.
Okay.
And so I learned Vipassana, and that was really made a huge impression on me because of the philosophy, right? So one is the practice of meditation that they teach you, but the other is they connect it to the philosophy of why you're doing what you're doing. And so that stayed with me. And so that Vipassana meditation, even today I do it. Again, it's not as consistent as I'd like it to be. So it goes through dry patches and I do it on a regular basis as much as I can. But I think that's my spirituality. In terms of believing in a creator God, I can't tell you that I have that. Conventional religion, rituals, I don't think I buy those. There are unknowns. So can I explain everything that I hear about?
Please,
And so, for example, I read Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani, and if it is true, which I assume is that there is a record in the Hong Kong Medical Journal about how she got completely cured out of all her cancer and boils and all of that in a short period of time and got discharged. That's an unknown to me, right? So these experiences of my roommates, for example, some psychic people I know who are friends of mine, and they make astral travel experiences and things like that. So I hear it. I tried past life regression also. Nothing happened to me, unfortunately, as of now. And I'm okay with it. But again, therefore, my sense is that your personal philosophies, your personal experiences to me are more important than hearsay. Because people who grow up in a very religious family, they end up being very religious usually and God-fearing or believe in creator God usually. In the logical, rational discussion and reading books and experiencing, I'm not sure how many folks today come up with the theory that, as a result of this, I feel that there is a creator God.
So how do you feel it's enabled you? Has it been an enabler in any manner, whatever practices you've done?
I think that the meditation, I think, has really been a huge help. Meditation has different components. There are so many different types of meditations, and whatever works for whomever. I think it's just also who you know. So if I know you and you talk about transcendental meditation like my roommate's friend did, then we went and did that. Then someone told me go and do Vipassana. So I went to Igatpuri and I did Vipassana. So it again depends on their context. Now, are those random? Are they coincidences? Or they are sent due to some influence and cosmic influence? I can't tell for sure. I'm happy if it is, and I'm okay if it is not. But I think one of the things that I can't imagine is that there is anything that I would worry about beyond this life. Was there an earlier life for me? Okay, if it was there, I'm happy, but I can't tell because there's nothing to tell me that there is something out there. So I'm not going to worry about it. After this, is there something for Jayesh Parekh? I can't imagine, so I'm okay with it. My life starts this life, ends in this life. Previous guy did some good thing because of this. I'm saying thank you to the previous Jayesh Parekh. The next Jayesh Parekh, hey, listen, hopefully I did well. Hopefully I enjoy life, right? But this particular Jayesh Parekh is one and is this life. And that's all that matters. If there is a God who sent me here, he sent me with the God fluid that I have. Right? You sent with different ones. She's done. Everybody is sent with different theories of God, whether Hindu, Christian, Muslim, atheists, agnostics. And then you come here and nobody's sitting up there and judging you, because if you're an atheist and that's how you're sent, and you say, you did not discover me, you did not pray to me that sounds super illogical. So my thesis is that if there's a creator God, he's just sent us out there to experience this life. And you come back to me if he's there. If he's not there also, you're okay.
And is this something that you feel you have clarity in processing through the meditations that you do? So just coming, kind of back to how the practices perhaps are helping you now in this life.
Yeah, I think that the meditation brings you peace and calm. You enjoy a metabolic rate which is much calmer, right? It works on your physical body as well.
Yeah.
But I think the processing of it depends on which kind of meditation you're doing. So in Vipassana meditation, you have this, you should not have cravings and aversions, for example. Equanimity.
Yeah.
That's a big thing for me. Equanimity is a huge thing for me. The other piece that they teach you is the law of impermanence. That's a huge thing for me. Everything is impermanent, right? And so, like Eckhart Tolle says, the power of now is right now, right? Whatever you're doing now is the only thing that matters. This is the only thing that's real. Whatever happens in the past is gone, and I don't dwell on past. That's one of the good things also. Fortunate for me that I don't live in my past. So the meditation, again, coming back to the meditation, I think that practice grounds you, calms you down, gives you peace of mind. But depending on the level of depth of experience that you have, each person, right? Over time, their experiences goes deeper and deeper, and you go deeper into yourself, and that means different things to different people. Right. It's not easy for someone to explain what the experiences I have versus what my roommate has now, who meditates 3 hours a day, 3 times a day. And the kind of experiences that he describes to me is completely unnatural, but he's having it. I'm happy for him.
And then when you bring it into context with, say, something like mindfulness, which is now evidence and research backed, and there's a lot of momentum on it, and aside of the spiritual stuff, since this is science based, it's coming into companies. How do you see that? Do you see there's value for entrepreneurs and for leaders in practicing mindfulness?
I think for everyone, not limited to executives or entrepreneurs. I think millennials, for example, millennials definitely should pick up on mindfulness as a thread, because most millennials whom I meet and talk to are purpose driven. They're looking for a mission. They're looking for a purpose in life. Now, if you're looking for purpose, then one of the things that jumps out is therefore the community well-being. So they either like environment or energy ecosystem, or whether it's alternative protein food systems. If they therefore have compassion inside of them, then one of the translation of that is mindfulness, right? So if you actually are mindful, then you discover a lot more, and you're a lot more willing and open than people who are incredibly strong in terms of their opinions and inflexibility.
Right.
So I think mindfulness gives you that openness.
Kind of curiosity,
and
non-judgment. So the wisdom element of being able to take the right decisions, so-called right decisions at the right time, be able to catch, what's pertinent.
But mindfulness alone can't help you do that. There are some other things that you need to do in life to get to that.
So tell me, what do you feel would be life skills that people should look at in the future?
So I think one of them is this mission, purpose, compassion, mindfulness, meditation. These are very good tools and technology. The one which I feel is important is your executive decision making skills, right? If you have good executive decision making skills, normally most things take care of itself. What is executive decision making skill? What kind of friends are you going to have and you're going to hang around with? Whom are you going to let go and whom are you going to stay with? What kind of hobbies will you nurture that's going to have a long-term impact on your life? So a lot of people like to play golf, and which is terrific, because there is a lot of benefit that goes in. It's not just simply networking, which is a byproduct, but also just the exercise, the place that you're doing and all of that. So I think one point of that is executive decision making, extremely important. People also talk about executive decision making within a job, but I say that when you're looking for a job, it's also important. Why? Because if you have a thread of going to work for a bank or going to work for a startup or starting your own enterprise, that's executive decision making, right? That directly is proportional to your risk taking ability, right? So that's the second feature, is to recognize and know your risk taking ability. If you know your risk taking ability, you either agree to be in that box and live your life and enjoy. So if you're going to be a professional and that's your risk taking ability, stay there. Don't worry about it. If you're ready to go out of your comfort zone, If you're ready to go out of your comfort zone and have that risk-taking ability, then you should certainly try entrepreneurship, as an example. But so that decision making
Correct. Yeah.
leads you to the risk taking, and your risk taking ability then threads you, saying you're going to go for a bank. Oh, I don't like it after 2 years. Let's start again at the bottom,
Yeah.
and let's go to work for an environment company.
Yeah.
Go through it. Oh no, I don't like this. Let me become an entrepreneur. So every time you're starting, so that thread that you choose is extremely important, because all the experiences, all the techniques, knowledge you gather
Right.
becomes useful, and you elevate yourself to the next level and the next level,
Yeah.
whether as an entrepreneur or as an executive.
Right.
The other piece is your communication skill. So, for example, my kids ended up both speaking American English because one was born in America. We came here, they were going to American school. Their communication skills are extremely good,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's fantastic, because there are a lot of people who have good stories.
Yeah.
So you have to be a storyteller. But if you have a good story but you can't communicate it,
Right.
then it just doesn't really work. And I say doesn't work as in it doesn't sell. And sell is all the time, there is a selling element, whether it to your employees, to your bosses, to directors, to your investors, to your vendors, to your suppliers, everyone, right? To your channel partners, etc. So that story, how you weave it and how you present it on any topic, not only limited to the economics,
Yeah.
but it could be also to do with your personal well-being, your friend circle. And so I think that's extremely important, is to be able to build a good communication skill. And it is not only limited to verbal, but also written skills. But getting up in front of people,
Yeah.
right? And so it could be 10 people, 100 people, just that comfort zone where you stand up, and there are a lot of people who naturally do it. Some people try to acquire it, I think. So those are important things. I think third is assessing your weighted average, what I call a weighted average, right? You assess your weighted average that says, what are these things that is going to ultimately make me happy, right? And in there is my relationships. So your spouse, partner, boyfriend, girlfriend. So there's a relationship piece there. Piece is your work, right? So in that work, you're desperately wanting to be an entrepreneur, but it's not working out. You're constantly unhappy about it, right? But within that work, you want to just keep growing, and from 1 million to 10 million to 100 million, but you're still not happy. I want to be $1 billion. I'm still unhappy. I want to be a $5 billion company, or somebody else is a $5 billion company. I'm stuck at 2.6 billion and I'm unhappy. So this is sort of another part of your weighted average.
Right.
Definitely your health is a big part of it, and then of course your spiritual well-being. However each one defines it individually, but however you define that, I think when you do all of that, connect it together, then I think those are the things that I would probably work
Right.
on.
And this is something that I feel like a lot of people are struggling with. What you just described is a very wholesome picture. And I think finding that right proportion of what works for you, what relationships work for you, takes a lot of self-awareness. And that's another thing I think one can look to cultivate with mindfulness as a practice. Even the executive decision making that you're speaking of, I think we are in a world where we are in a reactive mode, be it anything, and we're just constantly reacting. So I think shifting from that into a response mode, and like you said, I think into the decision making parts of our brain. Yeah.
I think that mindfulness comes from a place where you know what you want. If you know what you want, comes from what makes you happy. Now, you can do it naturally,
Yeah.
or you can do it unnaturally. Now, if it comes naturally to someone like me,
Yeah.
then I'm blessed, right? But I think a lot about that. So I'm mindful about what is making me happy and unhappy.
Yeah.
So when I find out that someone is impressed with my book, that's a limited joy. But I'm also aware of people who don't particularly think much about my book, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I have not written this book to impress people,
Yeah.
right? And so if that is clear in your mind, then you're okay. Otherwise, it's going to make you unhappy,
Correct.
right? And you're constantly going. So mindfulness is being that awareness and that mindfulness
Yeah.
that says that what are those things that make you happy?
Right. Yeah. And I think what you're describing is that disposition and that way of being where you can be that on a day-to-day basis. While it's like you said, I think it's not easy, and there is a way to practice it so that it shows up a lot more in our day-to-day life. Yeah.
I think the biggest culprit is what people think about you, your
Perception,
family,
yeah.
your kids, your job, your enterprise,
Yeah.
your valuation, your net worth,
Yeah.
how you look,
Yeah.
where you've been, what your Instagram photos look like.
Yeah.
All of that weaves a huge part of either unhappiness or discontent, or flip it.
Yeah.
And those guys who are flying, they feel, wow, I'm getting 100 likes on my Instagram
Yeah.
post, and so I'm just super happy.
Yeah.
And it creates
Yeah.
all kinds of fluids in your brain
Yeah.
that keeps you going, whether it's dopamine or
Yeah.
oxytocin or serotonin or
Yeah.
whatever it is.
And I think it's real that the validation is being sought out for. To say that one shouldn't seek that out, I think we all do live in a society, and to some level we do want to fit in. So I think it's realistic to assume that we need some level of validation, but I think what you're describing is getting too caught up in that, and our entire life is driven by that. That's where it kind of gets tricky. Yes.
Because it is a kicker,
Yeah.
right? I mean, who doesn't want to be appreciated?
Yeah.
Right? So, at some point in time, when a big success comes to you from whichever quarter, then, or if you're working on a theme, for example, mindfulness videos that you're creating,
Yeah.
and more people come to see it, that's great, but more and more people appreciate it. Who doesn't like that? Everybody likes that. The point is, the reason you're creating it can't be that.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yes.
And I think that's where there is a small difference to say that, okay, let me take a photograph with Sonam today. I'm doing this video. Let me post it and present it. And if I'm going to get 87 likes, I'm unhappy because I was expecting 100 likes and I only got 87. You did a fantastic job. Everything is great. But just because 13 less people appreciated you, you're deflated and disappointed. Therein lies the root problem.
Correct. Yeah. Absolutely. Jayesh, lastly, before we wrap up today's chat, what would you, and I know you have a gorgeous granddaughter, so I ask you this. If I were to ask you 3 things that you would really like for her to learn in her first 7 years.
I think I just wouldn't want her to worry about anything.
Yeah.
She should just be herself,
Yeah.
do her own thing. Her parents will send her to some school. She has
Yeah.
no choice. She will have to go there. Her parents will do things with her and for her,
Yeah.
and she has to just accept it and absorb it.
Yeah.
I'd say that happy-go-lucky, enjoy life, don't get too hung up. Unfortunately, she won't get hung up because she won't know what that is, fortunately.
Yeah.
But my take is, I think in that first 7 years, there is nothing more important than being happy and joyful and playful and experience life by meeting other kids
Yeah.
and socializing. Right, in the times right now what we're living in, it's not as easy for them, but they are still trying to make sure that the kids are meeting each other.
Yeah.
But I think that social relationship and engaging in that, and just a normal learning that every kid goes through.
Correct.
Fortunately for our granddaughter, she's blessed and she's
Yeah.
going through a good program.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Thank
course.
you. And I look forward to being back in conversation.
Look forward to it.
Thank you.
Okay, Sonam.